What is happening, everyone? Welcome to G-Ball Vision. Today, we are going to be covering lock failures. And it was brought to my attention a few days ago by a good buddy that his frame lock Brass Brigade gripper was failing some downward force on the spine of the blade. And it was basically closing the blade up with just very minimal force, just like you see there. And I thought, there's no way that that knife is doing that, and if it is, it has to be a one-off. A thick frame lock like so, like you see here, you would think this is going to be very durable, very strong. You know, you would have to snap the blade before that lock is going to fail, or you would have to bust some internals before that lock would fail. So I got mine out and I tested it, and of course it failed. And I started to go through some other knives to see, you know, if these knives were passing or failing. Just a very simple spine test. And there's some theory as to that not being a valid test, and I have to disagree. It might not be a scientific test, but to know if your lock can withstand a little bit of downward force on its spine, I think us as knife buyers deserve to have locking knives that are able to withstand that kind of tap on its spine. So I started to go through some different knives. We have the Vosteed RS Chaos here. This is a new White Mountain Knives exclusive. This has a compression lock, which is basically a reverse liner lock with a stop pin in there. And a knife like this, it does not fail. And that's about the farthest I'm going to take it. If it can pass, you know, and you can see the marks in the wood, if it can pass something like that, then I think it's acceptable. Because you're not going to be exerting that much upward force on a knife that past that type of force, you're not going to be closing the blade. So if it can withstand that, I think it's very good to go. So we have two very different outcomes when it comes to just these two knives here. And, you know, this is a titanium liner lock. This is a titanium frame lock, a solid piece of titanium there. So why is it that this one is passing and this one is failing? And I will do you one better. Here we have quite a bit of a smaller profile, definitely thinner on the frame lock, and this is the Miguron Pagos 2. Now, I've tested some of these, and some of them are passing, and some of them are failing. As you can see here, this one is passing. Now, why is it that this thinner titanium frame lock is passing, but this one is not? And you might say, well, this one is just, you know, a one-off. It's a fluke. Well, that's two. I know someone else who brought this to my attention, that their gripper is failing. My gripper is failing. So is it just a fluke with those two? Well, we have same company, the Miguron Centurion 2 here. This is a bolster lock. It's a frame lock in essence. Why is that one failing? So we have quite a issue, is what I'm going to say. And the reason, a lot of people, so it was my assumption, and that is my fault for the assumption. When you assume, you can make an ass out of yourself, right? Well, I was under the assumption that big, brute, titanium frame locks and liner locks and things of that nature, I thought it evident that they would definitely pass a test like that. Just a very mediocre test. it's expected and a definite possibility when you get into these more, I don't know, mystique type locking systems where you have a plunge lock going into the Tang there, working the kinks out of them, and having some of these fail that kind of a test because of that type of pressure and the plunge geometry just not being proper. But here's a company, and this is CJRB is the picture perfect company when it comes to designing that plunge lock system to not fail. So why is it that a plunge lock like this, that are very known to failing, from ProTech to Kaiser to Civivi to Vostede to you name the company, and a lot of them knives are failing that are button locks. So why is it that this type of lock can pass that kind of downward force, but a frame lock like this cannot handle even just the slightest? And I mean, guys, I'm tapping this. I'm tapping this, and it is breaking free. So there's a huge issue, I think, here. I never thought really to test these frame locks. Button locks is something that I've tested thoroughly because I want to know. I was testing a Vostede one day. This was about a year ago, and it just failed by me just lightly tapping it on its spine. It closed. And that's what started the button lock testing for me. But I never thought in a million years that I would need to test frame locks and liner locks. And I believe that is the case for a lot of content creators, whether it's the overlooking of the testing of the lock or what, I don't know what it is. Maybe it, like my experience was and my thought process was, those locks are going to pass. They have been doing liner locks and frame locks for years and years, liner locks for decades. There should be no reason that those locks are not locked up tight and able to withstand some pressure. So we really have a lot of information to digest here. So we have some frame locks that are failing, a bolster lock that's failing. We have a compression liner lock that is passing. We have a button lock that is passing. This is a knife that I have not tested yet. This is a crossbar lock from Hogue. I do not expect this to fail. So and there's a couple keys if you want to test your knife. You start at the tip up here, and that is where a lot of these knives will fail. But if it is not failing there, check it closer to the Tang, and that will be a tall tale sign. Between here and here, start with some light taps. Make sure your hand is clear of the path of the blade unless you want to cut yourself. And don't be, unless you're very comfortable doing this, don't do it. Because there's definitely a chance to either cut yourself or break your knife, So I am doing this for my benefit and everyone else's benefit. So this crossbar lock is passing with flying colors. I expected the crossbar lock to pass. So now we have another crossbar lock. This is a brand new Vostede Raccoon. That is also passing with flying colors. So why don't we move to a standard compression lock, Spyderco Para 3. Very similar lock, same lock basically as the Vostede, and we should not expect any failures. So no failures coming from compression locks. And feel free to let me know down in the comments why you think these knives are failing and these other knives are passing. Knives that are more boutique, these button locks are, these are not meant to be hard use. These are meant to be fun, fidgety knives. Whereas a frame lock is meant to be overbuilt, heavy duty use, hard use, when concerning a folder. We're not talking obviously about fixed blade like strength. We're talking about folder like strength. And why is it that some frame locks are passing, some are failing? Why is it that some button locks are passing and some are failing? Right here, we have a El Cheapo F & Grow knife here, $25. I have not tested this one yet. It is a steel liner lock. We're about to see where this lands. So we have a $25 liner lock here. Lockup is still solid. Lockup is still looking exactly the same. So why is it that a $25 liner lock is passing, but a $250, $300 frame lock is failing? I want to try to get to the bottom of it, and I don't know if it has to do with, you see how the frame lock itself is basically completely flat there? I've come to a semi-conclusion that the ones that are completely flat, as you see here, opposed to the ones that you see that have a slight angle to them, the ones that have the slight angle seem to be the ones that pass. And the ones that are completely flat, as you see here, are the ones that are seemingly failing. Now, I have not, that's not 100% certainty. I don't know that for fact, but that's what all my testing leading up to today has showed me, is the ones that have that slight pitch to them, that slight angle, they seem to be passing. The ones that have that flat are the ones that seem to be failing. And if you're thinking, well, this button lock is holding up, and that must be the case for all button locks possibly, right? Maybe you just don't know. Here's another button lock from Vlastede, a fantastic knife, a fantastic looking knife. It's a fantastic user. This is the predecessor to the crossbar sheep's foot version. And this is the knife that started all this for me. It is just unbelievable how easy, and there has been people who have been in a cut and went to come out of the cut or came up and hit the spine of that blade, and the blade literally closed on your fingers or on their fingers. It has not personally happened to me, but I do know several people that has happened to. And in the case of, some of these knives like this one, if this were to close on your hand, you was really bearing down, cutting something and came back up, you could do some very scary damage with some of these knives that are extremely sharp. They all should be extremely sharp depending on, how much use it has given you and the design of the blade. But with these lock systems failing, people are at risk to a severe injury. Now, this is for the people who are really using their knives, and you use your knives day in and day out. You cut a lot of stuff. You're not just sitting at home, flipping it, and that's all you do with it. If that's all you do with, your gripper, if that's all you do with your Vosteed, is just sit at home and do this, and you might cut an envelope open, or you might cut some tape. This really isn't for you. It's definitely something to keep in mind, of course, but if you're not really using them for what they're made for, this really don't concern you a whole lot. But for the people who are out using their knives, and their pocket knife, their folding knife is their dedicated cutting tool for most things, it's something to be very alarmed about, because just in these last couple of days, I haven't kept track yet. I'm going to try to mark everything down that I find out, what lock, what knife, what lock, is it passing, is it failing, and try to dig into this a lot deeper, because you tell me, is it a big issue or is it not a big issue? Because to me, I use my knives every day. I use different knives every day. I use them all day long. Some days, not as much as other days, but I use my knives every day as much as I pretty much can use a knife. So to me, it's very concerning, that, and especially, I expect this damn knife to be built like a brick, and hold up and be solid like a brick. Especially the amount of money that some of these knives cost. A locking knife should stay locked up unless under extreme amounts of pressure, in my opinion. Of course, if you hang several 100 pounds off this, 200 pounds or more, of course, but as far as just simply being able to unlock the knife like you see me doing here, which, guys, like I said, I was hitting the button locks harder than that. So I don't get it, and I'm actually concerned about going through the rest of my knives, and because at this rate, it's like every other knife that I test is failing. Now, I did have a string of 6 or 8 knives that all passed, but then again, I have a lot that are failing. This one was passing at first, and then I kind of found the right spot, and then it started failing. You see how up close to the Tang there? That's what gets it, and I don't understand it completely. It's very bothersome to me, and it is something I'm going to not take lightly from here on out. Any knives that I get in, I will be testing it, whether it's a liner lock, a frame lock, a button lock, crossbar lock. It does not matter what locking system it is. I will be checking that knife to see if that lock is holding up. In my experience, all the reviewers that I watch, all the ones that I watch, none of them thoroughly test their knives or test the knives to that extent. I've seen a few that will spine whack, a button lock, for instance, and that's basically the extent of it. And I think that's a huge issue, because a lot of these manufacturers are aware of the fact that the consumer, a good majority of the consumers of these knives are buying a lot of knives. They're barely using them. They're using them for photos. They're using them for fidgeting with. They're not testing them. they're not using them, and I think you will find the people who, you'll probably be able to look down in the comments, and there will be people whose knives have closed on their hand, or, they were testing their knife and it is also failing. And I don't mean to be an alarmist or anything like that, but I think, and do it in the safest way possible. If you're not comfortable with doing it, then don't do it. But just be very weary of the fact that there's a big possibility in the wrong scenario that blade could close on your hand, depending on the knife, the model, the lock. It's a huge possibility. Whether it's a frame lock, a liner lock, a button lock. I have not had a crossbar lock or a compression lock knife fail yet. And it really kills me to say this, but a couple of my favorite knives of all time are actually failing this test. The Relative is failing this test. The Null Knives Voodoo is failing this test. It's a huge letdown. And will some of these designers and some of these companies try to fix it, try to make it right? I'm sure that, they would, but that's not the issue. I think the bigger issue is going back to production, and the companies who are producing these knives are not making either the geometry of that lock properly, they are not making the tolerances the way they should be. Something is not right. Now, you might be thinking, well, is it just this OEM or is it just that OEM? No, it's not. We have Best Tech knives. We have Riot knives. We have Vastid, which a lot of that is Kaiser. So there's a plethora of different knife manufacturers that are not going the distance when it comes to making sure these locks are doing what they're supposed to in staying locked up. Now, giving credit where credit is due, at some points like this here, this Vastid is passing with flying colors. But then you grab a couple other Vastids and they're failing. So it's very alarming. It's a huge issue to me, and I really don't know where to go from here with all of this. I don't know if it's just my luck and I have a bunch of knives that are failing this test, or is it across the board and a lot of people are having this issue? They just don't know it, because there's no way in hell. The odds would be, 1 in a million that I'm the only person getting these knives. And it's not like these are cheap knives. Some of these are fairly expensive knives, and they are failing with little to barely any downward force. Now, I can say that I was running some other testing. None of this is scientific, guys. But on the other hand, which is a good thing, I cannot create enough force, just force, and close or make that lock fail. I don't know exactly what it is, but I can't put enough force, and I put a glove on and I've really wrenched on some of these ones that are failing, and I cannot get them to fail this way. So there is that. But in most cases, if you are in a cut, a long cut or whatever, and you come back up and hit material, it's going to be this kind of pressure. It's not going to be like this, where you hit it and it's even and equal. It's going to be like you come up and it's going to be a quick pop on that spine. How often does that happen? Not a ton, but it does happen. And that's not the point of any of this. It is a little bit, but the point is we have these expensive production knives from all kinds of different OEMs and manufacturers. And, some of them, it's a little harder to get them to break the lockup. But some of them, it is just extremely, extremely easy. And guys, I'm barely tapping it. And it's breaking free. We can do it here where there's not any marks, and you can see I might not even leave a mark. Just barely a little bit, and that's from this angle here. But, I'm not here smashing them, like I'm swinging a baseball bat. So you guys will have to let me know down in the comments, where do we go from here? Because I don't really know. Everything I thought I knew, I really don't. This has been a huge wake-up call to me to really start looking at these knives and testing these knives. It's a huge issue to me. And it's not directed at any one company, any one designer. I think it's an issue across the board. And I'm not saying it's the designer's fault. I think it mainly boils down to the manufacturing process. You'll have to let me know, if you've hung around through the whole video. Let me know down in the comments, who you hold responsible. What do you think's going on? What are the reasons for some of these various locks failing? Because it's a multitude of different locks, makers, companies. It's a very overwhelming thing and very aggravating. Collectors, we spend money on these knives, and our expectation is, that they come sharp, that the heat treat is good, that the lockup is solid, the lock is solid, and a lot of these knives, that's not the case for the lock. So let me know down in the comments what you think. Give the video a thumbs up or a thumbs down, whichever you prefer. And if you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. I love you guys, and I'll catch you on the next one.